Super God Gene Chapter 6. Suddenly, Han Sen saw something green, about a foot long, sticking to the grass like a leaf. If he didn't look closely, he would have thought it was part of the grass and would have never imagined it to be a swift mantis that could split a human skull with a single blow. Its pair of sickle-like, jagged forelegs were even longer than its body. Dark green in color, the forelegs were covered in a metal sheen, and were nothing like its fragile body. The rigidity of the forelegs was definitely comparable to the most advanced alpha alloy. Han Sen was lucky that he found the swift mantis before it saw him. Moving towards it, he calculated the nearest he could get to it before being noticed by the swift mantis. When he was about 6 feet away from the swift mantis, Han Sen did not dare to go any farther, fearing he might lose the opportunity to attack by stealth. Tightly holding the dagger in his hand, Han Sen rushed out from the grass and cut at the swift mantis' waist in a fast and ruthless strike. But Han Sen had still underestimated the speed and responsiveness of the swift mantis. It had noticed his presence the moment he rushed out. All of a sudden, it rose into the air, gliding with wings spread towards Han Sen in a truly swift move. Its forelegs had cut him in the head before he could even react. Han Sen subconsciously stepped back in shock, yet the mantis' forelegs still hit his head. With a sound of metal clashing, Han Sen felt only slight discomfort, as if his head were hit by a stone. And there was not even a scratch on the sacred blood beast soul armor. Filled with ecstasy, Han Sen seized the opportunity to cut into the slim waist of the swift mantis in front of him with a fierce stab. The swift mantis was cut into 2 halves, green mantis blood splashing him wet all over. Han Sen didn't care at all and listened to the strange voice in his head blissfully. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift mantis to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Touching his helmet where the swift mantis cut to feel it was still smooth, Han Sen thought to himself in excitement, haha, the armor is everything. With my armor, I could kill whatever I want to kill and no one could ever hurt me. I wouldn't even fear mutant creatures. Han Sen suddenly gained courage and stopped hiding. He marched to Zephyr Valley and alerted several swift mantises to attack, but they couldn't hurt him at all by cutting his armor. Han Sen took the opportunity to kill them all, each with 1 stab. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift mantis to gain 0 to 10 points randomly. Primitive creature swift mantis killed. The voice continuously sounded in his mind, adding to his thrill. He stabbed his way through the valley and killed more 20 mantises in succession. Su Xiaoqiao was on his way to Zephyr Valley as well, quietly mulling over his own bad luck. His parents were the owners of an interstellar conglomerate and were considered both distinguished and aristocrats. He, however, was randomly assigned to Steel Armor Shelter, where he had no friends or even acquaintances. To get an aristocratic title, Su Xiaoqiao could only choose to follow Qin Zan in order to max out on mutant geno points and become an evolver. There were 2 types of titles in Levo Interstellar Alliance. One was distinguished. Once one became a surpasser, one could be certified as distinguished. The other was an aristocratic. If one could evolve with 100 mutant or more advanced geno points, one could be certified as an aristocrat. Either title involved a lot of benefits in the alliance, and most importantly they were a symbol of social status. Today in the alliance, people were more and more snobby. People from the upper class wouldn't even talk to someone without a title, even when doing business. Advanced titles like Sacred Blood Aristocrat were beyond Su Xiaoqiao's dreams. All he wanted was to gain the title of Ordinary Aristocrat by maxing out on mutant geno points and completing an evolution. However, to get 100 mutant geno points was still too difficult for him on his own. He did bring a lot of money to Steel Armor Shelter, but money could only buy ordinary and primitive creature flesh, as very few people would sell mutant creatures. Only people who aimed to max out on sacred geno points like Qin Zan would sometimes sell the mutant creature flesh they had. However, it wasn't money that she wanted, but loyalty and service. Su Xiaoqiao was now running errands for Qin Zan, exploring the places less known to people and looking for traces of sacred blood and mutant creatures to gather information for her. With the information, she could then gather a team to hunt down these creatures, and the team members would get mutant creature flesh in return. Su Xiaoqiao had been exploring for a month and found no traces of mutant creatures, not to mention sacred blood ones. Running out of supplies, he had to return to Steel Armor Shelter. When he passed Zephyr Valley, he thought there might be mutant creatures around, as the area was so sparsely populated. After he sneaked in the valley, he felt something strange. He didn't see any swift mantises, not even one. A mile into the valley, all he saw were some messy traces on the ground. Someone must have wiped out the swift mantises. Fist guy or son of heaven? No, although there are signs of fighting, there should be more damage if it were a group of people. Quote, surprised, Su Xiaoqiao sped into the valley, wondering what had happened. As he expected, there were many green blood stains from swift mantises along the way. He followed the blood stains and turned a corner. What he saw stopped him in his tracks, appalled. Next to the piled bodies of swift mantises stood a golden figure. In the sun, the figure looked like a robot in gold cast armor. Super God Gene, Chapter 7. Brother, you killed all these swift mantises. Su Xiaoqiao saw no one except for the guy in golden armor. The dead mantises were still bleeding, so they couldn't have been dead for long. Su Xiaoqiao couldn't believe that someone was able to kill so many mantises in such a short amount of time. Although the swift mantis was only a primitive creature, considering the sharpness of its forelegs and its speed, even those who had maxed out on primitive geno points didn't dare to provoke it. After all, there were too many weak spots on human body, and no one wanted to risk losing his life or getting severely injured from a mantis cut. There were at least 36 dead swift mantises on the ground. Even Qinzan would need some helping hands to achieve this. Su Xiaoqiao wouldn't believe that someone could have done it alone. Want some? 1,000 levo dollars each. Han Sen was just considering what to do with the mantises. He was on a killing spree and forgot the fact that there was no way he could eat so much mantis meat. And even if he could eat them all, only the first few could gain him geno points. 1,000 each. Are you sure? Su Xiaoqiao looked at him, surprised. Although many people were able to hunt primitive creatures, they were in short supply, especially the ones that most people had never eaten, like swift mantis. After all, people's energy was limited, and there was a limit to how many geno points the meat from the same type of creature could offer. Only by eating the flesh of a variety of creatures could one keep collecting geno points. Those who were relatively well off would all be willing to pay for the creatures they hadn't eaten yet in order to be able to quickly max out on their primitive geno points. Therefore, the primitive creatures that were easy to kill could bring a few hundred each, while the ones that were difficult to hunt, such as the swift mantis, could sell for 2,000 or 3,000 each and still be in short supply. Su Xiaoqiao calculated and figured that he could double or triple the price if he could transport these mantis bodies back. Yes, 1,000 levo dollars each. Han Sen nodded. It wasn't that Han Sen did not know what the mantises were worth. Without a car or other tools, there was simply no way he could move all these bodies back on his own. And if he left now, the bodies might be stolen when he returned. Moreover, Han Sen did not want to waste his time and energy on this. He had more important things to do, and he could take some loss of the profits. As the wholesaler, he had to leave some profit to the retailer. Sure, I'll take them all. How many are there? Su Xiaoqiao was on board. The swift mantises could bring him more than money. Primitive creatures like the swift mantis that ordinary people couldn't easily access would make great gifts. No one could refuse such a nice offer, as long as they hadn't maxed out on primitive geno points. A total of 43. I'll give you a discount and charge only 40,000. Han Sen was just casually asking and did not expect this ordinary-looking guy to be so rich that he could buy them all. Su Xiaoqiao took out his wallet and pulled out 10 $10,000 notes. Brother, I'll give you 50,000 for these mantises. The other 50,000 is a down payment for whatever good stuff you may have in the future. I'll always give you a good price and would pay even higher for mutant creature flesh. 100,000 was a small amount for Su Xiaoqiao. It would even cost him as much to buy someone a fancy dinner. This person was so badass that he killed all these mantises on his own, so it was highly likely that he could hunt mutant creatures too. If it was possible to purchase mutant creature flesh from him, a few 100 million was nothing. Couldn't tell you were rich. Han Sen took the money and said bluntly, looking at Xiaoqiao slightly surprised. In all honesty, money is all I have. If you have mutant creature flesh to sell, do let me know. The price is definitely not a problem, Su Xiaoqiao boasted, afraid that he might lose this great opportunity. Great. What's your name and address? I will come and find you if I have something. Han Sen appreciated Xiaoqiao's generosity, and thought he might be an ideal buyer for the mutant creature he planned to produce using the black crystal. After all, the black crystal had to remain a secret. Selling the creature to one person was much better than selling it in the market in front of everyone. And he didn't even need to worry about the price since Xiaoqiao was incredibly rich. Brother, my name is Su Xiaoqiao, and that's my real name. My room number at Steel Armor Shelter is 1046. How about you? What's your name and where do you live? Su Xiaoqiao said. Dollar. That's the only thing I care about. Prepare some money, and I'll go to room 1046 once I have something. Han Sen put the money into his pocket, waved goodbye to Xiaoqiao and left Zephyr Valley. Having been through his father's death, Han Sen did not want to have too many exchanges with others. He just wanted to take care of his mother and sister and do his own thing. Other people or things didn't really affect him. Brother, I'll wait for you. You must come. Remember, the price is definitely not a problem. Su Xiaoqiao shouted at the back of Han Sen while waving his hand. After Han Sen left, Su Xiaoqiao couldn't help but call out, how could I get these back? Su Xiaoqiao thought for a while and decided to carry some back in a bag and ask some friends to help him carry the rest. Fortunately, there were almost no humans in Zior Valley. When Su Xiaoqiao came back with friends, all the bodies were still there. Xiaoqiao, is it true that Dollar killed all these swift mantises? Su Xiaoqiao's friends looked wide-eyed at the pile of mantis bodies. Of course, although I did not see him hunting, there was no one else in Zephyr Valley at the time and the mantises had just died. Who else could it be? Su Xiaoqiao said, I think it must be a gang of people that killed these swift mantises, and others must have left him to deal with the bodies. I don't believe one person could kill so many mantises. He must be bragging. Quote, he was definitely bragging. None of Su Xiaoqiao's friends believed Han Sen killed the swift mantises alone. Super God Gene, Chapter 8. Han Sen didn't go back to Steel Armor Shelter after leaving Zephyr Valley. In a flash, he killed every swift mantis in a frenzy so that there were none left. Well, I'll just go hunt a copper-toothed beast. There are plenty of them near Steel Armor Shelter and there is a high chance of catching a mutant copper-toothed beast, so it wouldn't seem too suspicious if I were to produce a mutant one using the crystal. Han Sen found a habitat of copper-toothed beasts and wanted to catch one that was alone. Only able to find a small group of copper-toothed beasts, Han Sen went ahead and killed all of them but one, taking advantage of his tough armor. Primitive creature copper-toothed beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of copper-toothed beast to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Primitive creature copper-toothed beast killed. Primitive beast soul of copper-toothed beast gained. Eat the flesh of copper-toothed beast to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly. Han Sen's eyes widened in surprise. The 43 swift mantises and thousands of ordinary creatures he had killed didn't render a single beast soul. Now he had killed only 2 copper-toothed beasts and gained a beast soul. To get a beast soul requires pure luck. Han Sen was filled with joy. Although it was common, the beast soul of a copper-toothed beast was quite nice to have. The copper-toothed beast was one of the weakest among all primitive creatures, but its beast soul was popular. Han Sen summoned the new beast soul, and a porcupine-like shadow with bronze fangs shifted into a bronze crescent spear in his hand. The crescent spear had a bronzy sheen and a menacing look with its crescent-shaped spearhead. Type of primitive beast soul of copper-toothed beast, weapon. Han Sen played with the spear for a while, looking quite fierce. He was taught basic spear skills at school. Han Sen was interested in all kinds of weapons, so he learned well. Han Sen put away his spear before he grabbed the living copper-toothed beast and went back. On his way back, he found a lonely spot to remove his armor. Looking like himself again, Han Sen went back to Steel Armor Shelter, carrying the knocked-out and tied-up copper-toothed beast on his shoulder. At the gate of the shelter, a gang of about a dozen people were marching out, all riding on different tall beast soul mounts, headed by a man wearing steel armor and carrying a blood-red sword on his back. The man was riding a triceratops-like beast soul mount, looking mighty and majestic, attracting envious glances from all around. In Steel Armor Shelter, there are 3 outstanding persons who aim to complete evolution by maxing out on sacred geno points. This man, Son of Heaven, was one of them. Han Sen didn't know his real name and identity, but he was definitely a king in Steel Armor Shelter. Carrying the copper-toothed beast, Han Sen stepped aside to let the gang pass. However, Son of Heaven stopped his mount when passing by him. Crack! Son of Heaven looked at Han Sen and slashed him on the shoulder with a leather whip. The copper-toothed beast fell on the ground, and Han Sen's clothes were ripped apart. A wound started to swell on his shoulder and back. Who had the nerve to sell you this primitive creature? Son of Heaven asked in a cold tone, looking down at him condescendingly. In Steel Armor Shelter, everyone knew that Son of Heaven was wooing Qinzan. As Freak who stabbed Qinzan in the rear naturally became his enemy. He was also one of the reasons why Han Sen was miserable. When learning Qinzan was stabbed, Son of Heaven not only had Han Sen beaten up but also let everyone know that whoever would dare to do business with Han would become his enemy for life. I hunted it myself. Han Sen stared back coldly, fist clenched but standing still. Not only had Son of Heaven gained a lot of Geno points, but he also had collected many beast souls. Since he had help from his gang, Han Sen wouldn't be able to touch the guy even with his best effort. Even with his sacred blood armor, he would be beaten to death before he approached Son of Heaven. God's sanctuary was different from the Alliance in that there was no law at all. Power was everything. Han Sen would only die in vain. Plus, Son of Heaven was said to be of prominent origin in the Alliance. Even if Han Sen were killed by him in the Alliance, Son of Heaven might not be subject to legal sanctions. Han Sen was not afraid of death. But if he died, what about his mother and sister? If I find out that someone dares to sell to you, I'll make sure you both die in pain. Son of Heaven looked around and rode away. Ass freak, don't make trouble. Or else I don't mind teaching you another lesson. Luo Tianyang smirked at Han Sen before following the gang on a black wildebeest. Luo Tianyang, a henchman and old acquaintance in the alliance of Son of Heaven, was one of those whom he sent to beat Han Sen up. Han Sen watched the gang going away with fire burning in his eyes. He picked up the copper-toothed beast quietly and walked towards Steel Armor's shelter, with everyone watching him with derision. Stronger. I need to become stronger. With scorching anger in his chest, Han Sen knew he was far too weak to fight the gang on his own. The black crystal, however, was his biggest opportunity. Son of Heaven, just get rid of him for good, Luo Tianyang said coldly. Son of Heaven smiled and said, Chinzan is a stubborn girl. She doesn't like people to intervene in her business. Since she did not kill Han Sen, she might be upset if I did. What an unwise woman, another henchman of Son of Heaven, Peerless Sword, said. It's her honor that you, bro, would chase her, while she just puts on airs. If it weren't for you, I would have killed her already. Don't put Chinzan down. She is quite something in both God's sanctuary and the Alliance. If she becomes mine, it will be a huge advantage to me. Son of Heaven said grimly, end of discussion. We need to get to Sunset Slope before Fist Guy's gang. That sacred blood creature has to be ours. Super God Gene, Chapter 9. Han Sen returned to his room, tied the copper-toothed beast to a cage and put the black crystal in front of it. The beast gobbled up the black crystal greedily. After an entire day, Han Sen noticed some changes to the copper-toothed beast. Its fur had been gray-black like a wild boar, and its fangs had been bronze. Now its fur also started to show a bit of bronze luster, and the fangs had become brighter in color. However, this was not a true mutant copper-toothed beast, which ought to look like a bronze statue. Although this one did show some bronze luster, it was still quite different from a mutant one. It seems that the evolution from a primitive creature to a mutant creature is a more complex process than from ordinary to primitive, so it requires more time than one day, Han Sen pondered. After more than 2 days, its bronze color thickened, but the copper-toothed beast still didn't look like it was going to evolve anytime soon. Han Sen had to let the beast evolve at its own pace, and go kill some primitive creatures for money. Plus, he could also use some primitive Geno points. Even if one didn't choose to use the primitive Geno points to complete evolution, the more primitive Geno points one gained, the stronger the body would become. And the same went for ordinary and mutant Geno points. If one could max out on ordinary, primitive and mutant Geno points, one's physical conditions would still be far beyond the average level, even without evolution. With the Black Crystal, it wouldn't be difficult for Han Sen to max out on all 4 types of Geno points. At the moment, he wanted to max out on the other 3 before he focused on sacred Geno points. Han Sen left his room and walked into the shelter, feeling slightly different. Today the streets seemed to be a lot less crowded than usual. What's going on? Han Sen walked past the plaza and found fewer stalls there than usual as well. People there were all whispering something to each other. Han Sen listened for a while and started to figure out what had happened. A few days ago, someone had spotted a new sacred blood creature near the Sunset Slope. Somehow the 3 gangs in Steel Armor's shelter all found out about it and gathered at the slope, but the outcome was terrible. The sacred blood creature ran free while a lot of men were killed. Today, Chinzan, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy had reached an agreement to hunt the sacred blood creature together. They also recruited a lot of lone wolves and smaller groups, forming the largest campaign in Steel Armor's shelter in recent years. The 3 gangs were determined to kill this creature. Han Sen suddenly had an idea, so he turned around and ran out of the city. When there was no one around, he summoned the black beetle beast soul and covered himself in armor. After running for 2 hours, he came to a stone hill west of Sunset Slope. Having finally climbed to the top of the hill, Han Sen took a look in the direction of Sunset Slope. Among thousands of people fighting and yelling, there was a monster with the head of a cow, the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. It was holding a double-edged golden axe and pushing its way through the crowd. No one could withstand the fierce blow of its axe. Han Sen happened to see the monster swinging the axe at Son of Heaven, who even had his blood-red sword. Son of Heaven did not dare to block the axe. He stepped on his own mount and leapt back a few feet. Roar! The monster's double-edged axe hit the Triceratops-like beast soul mount and split it in 2 halves. That broke Son of Heaven's heart. A mutant beast soul mount was very rare, with the same value as a small interstellar spaceship. How is this sacred blood creature so strong? Han Sen was shocked. The sacred blood creature ran and killed thousands of people in a flash, and no one was able to fight back. Even people as strong as Qin Zan, Son of Heaven and Fist Guy didn't dare to engage in a frontal attack. Hit by all sorts of alloy arrows and beast soul arrows, the monster still didn't even get a scratch. When it swung the axe, no one could get close. Such a mighty creature corresponded to Han Sen's impression of a sacred blood creature. The sacred blood black beetle he killed was way too weak compared to this monster. It was only a little stronger than an ordinary black beetle and didn't even feel like a sacred blood creature. People were expecting to trap the sacred blood creature, but now a key buffer was lost as the mount of Son of Heaven was killed. The sacred blood creature was charging madly, waving the golden double-edged axe and leaving screams, blood, and limbs behind. It took it only moments to rush out of the siege to the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, it even smugly turned around and stood on its back legs, mooing like a cow before it ran into the mountain. F***K. It wants to escape. Son of Heaven furiously summoned a green eagle-shaped beast soul, which turned into a green iron bow in his hand. Then he summoned a fiery beast soul in the shape of a giant 6-winged wasp as his arrow. Seeing the arrow, Qin Zan and Fist Guy exclaimed, a sacred blood beast soul of a 6-winged wasp. They had joined force with Son of Heaven in hunting the sacred blood 6-winged wasp. Son of Heaven was the one who had launched the final blow. They just didn't expect him to be so lucky to have gained its beast soul. There were less than 10 beast souls known to people in the entire steel armor shelter, and many were left by those who already had evolved and gone to Second God's sanctuary. Son of Heaven, stop. It's a beast soul that can only be used once. If you failed to kill it, Luo Tianyang wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Son of Heaven had already shot the sacred blood beast soul arrow with a full draw. The arrow turned into a red lightning bolt flying towards the sacred blood creature. Bang! The sacred blood creature felt the imminent danger and turned around. The wasp arrow shot into its chest and exploded, bursting open its flesh. The monster fell to the ground, losing its vitality as its internal organs and blood sprayed out. How dare you kill my mount? There is no way I'd let you live after doing that, Son of Heaven yelled loftily, standing like a king, leaving everyone in shock. While proud to see the crowd being impressed, including Qin Zan, Son of Heaven suddenly saw a green shadow shooting down from the sky into the dying sacred blood creature and ended its life. A golden figure immediately rushed down from the stone hill nearby and approached the sacred blood creature. Lifting the golden double-edged axe to his shoulder, the mysterious figure ran towards the mountain in a flash. Su Xiaoqiao recognized Han Sen's unique golden armor in no time and called out loud. Super God Gene, Chapter 10. Han Sen was hiding on the stone hill when the sacred blood creature charged in his direction. As he was deciding whether to retreat, he saw Son of Heaven shoot down the sacred blood creature. Anger surged and Han Sen rushed down the stone hill while summoning the bronze crescent spear. He shot the spear at the monster and hit it in the wounded chest, killing the dying creature. Sacred blood Bloody Slayer killed. Sacred blood beast soul Bloody Slayer gained. Eat the flesh of Bloody Slayer to gain 0 to 10 sacred geno points randomly. The voice in the back of his head brought him intense joy. He had just gained another sacred blood beast soul. His luck was too good to believe. However, Han Sen did not have time to celebrate. The body of the Bloody Slayer was too large for him to take away, but what he could take away was the giant golden axe. The creatures in God's sanctuary could produce certain treasures through special means. People called these treasures gears. Although gears were just like solid items and could not be summoned like beast souls, they could perform as well as beast souls if they were produced by advanced creatures. The Bloody Slayer was peerless when holding the golden axe, and the axe could easily break normal beast soul weapons and beast soul mounts, so it proved to be an excellent sacred blood gear. Han Sen's goal was to get the golden axe, and the beast soul of Bloody Slayer was completely unexpected loot. Watching Han Sen running on the mountain with the golden axe, everyone was stunned. Mother #Kerr. Son of Heaven let out a raging roar when he realized what had happened. With a black wildebeest summoned as his mount, he rode madly in Han Sen's direction. Behind him, his gang all raced off on their own mounts to chase Han Sen, roaring and rebuking him. Han Sen did not expect the golden axe to be so terribly heavy. With 8 sacred Geno points, he was already a lot stronger than before, yet he could still barely walk with the axe, not to mention run. The Bloody Slayer made it seem so light. How could I run off with such a heavy weapon? Hansen looked back and could already see Son of Heaven and his gang only half a mile from him. Although it was too heavy to carry, Han Sen would never leave behind such an excellent sacred blood gear. He suddenly thought of his newly gained beast soul of the Bloody Slayer, took a look at it and suddenly cheered up. Type of sacred blood Bloody Slayer's beast soul, shapeshifting. Without thinking, Han Sen summoned the beast soul of Bloody Slayer and a majestic shadow galloped out, looking just like the monster, only missing the giant axe. The beast soul ran towards Han Sen and was instantly integrated with him. His body was transformed into a Bloody Slayer and the black beetle armor changed its shape accordingly, still fully covering Han Sen's body as a Bloody Slayer. After all, beast soul armor was not as rigid as man-made ones and could change according to the shape of the body. After shapeshifting, Han Sen felt so energetic that the golden axe was now nothing to him. Running with 4 hoofs, he also became incredibly fast. Han Sen surged up the mountain at full speed and disappeared, far outpacing the gang. Everyone was speechless, as everything happened so fast. Many smirked as they watched Son of Heaven and others who were still chasing Han Sen. **T. Who was that guy? He's got some nerve jumping into the boiling pot. And what loot! In addition to the golden axe, he gained a sacred blood beast soul. Can you imagine how much it must be worth? You think you could buy a sacred blood beast soul just with money? Ha ha, Son of Heaven must be so mad. A sacred blood beast soul. It would have been his but was taken away. The arrow he used seemed like a one-off sacred blood beast soul. And what did he get in return for such investment, lol. I'm just afraid Son of Heaven will lose his mind. Didn't expect there to be a sacred blood beast soul. How lucky that guy is. He could never have killed the monster alone. And a dozen sacred blood creatures may not even render a single beast soul. It just happened that he gained everything with the last hit. Who was that guy indeed? Is there such a person in steel armor shelter? I heard someone call him Doll, but not sure. Doll. Interesting name. After less than an hour, Son of Heaven returned gloomily with his gang, but people already knew it was impossible to find someone on the winding mountain trails. Son of Heaven immediately questioned Su Xiaoqiao when he got back. His exclamation, "Dollar," had been a mistake. Su Xiaoqiao had no choice but to tell him everything about how he met Han Sen, which wasn't very helpful since all he had was a name, Dollar. Son of Heaven didn't fully believe him, but couldn't do much as Su Xiaoqiao was in Qinzhan's gang. He bitterly led his gang back to steel armor shelter and locked down the shelter, swearing to find Dollar and cut him into pieces. Most people did not learn the name Dollar, while Doll became popular. For a while, Doll, Son of Heaven, Sacred Blood Creature, and Sacred Blood Beast Soul became the most popular topics in steel armor shelter.